On January 30th, 2009, the South African government did something unprecedented. It signed the death warrant for the most effective law enforcement agency in the nation's history. Known as the Scorpions, this was a specialized squad of elite investigators and legal minds designed to do what the regular police were no longer capable of, purging the country of high-level syndicates and political rot. For a decade, they acted as the state's most lethal shield, wielding a level of forensic aggression that made them the most feared name in the underworld. Their unwavering adherence to justice eventually transformed them into a terminal liability for the political elite. By following a trail of billion-rand kickbacks all the way to the top of the ANC leadership, they transformed from the nation's defenders into a political threat that the ruling elite couldn't afford to ignore. This is the story of how the ANC leadership under Jacob Zuma chose to liquidate the nation's most elite guard dog the moment it began to bite the hands that were looting the state. To understand why the Scorpions were built, you have to look at the vacuum left by the fall of the old regime. Widespread organized crime hadn't really been a problem in the old South Africa. While the apartheid-era South African police, or SAP, may have been oppressive in many respects, the organization was robust and was way less corrupt than its successor. Its intelligence networks kept a lid on organized crime through sheer iron-fisted control. When that regime collapsed, that rigid control vanished overnight. But when that machine was dismantled, the transition left the nation in a state of profound institutional vulnerability. South Africa was a hopeful but fragile young democracy, and into that openness rushed a new, predatory breed of organized crime. These syndicates exploited the new system's growing pains, and by the mid-90s, the country was actively being targeted by criminals who saw a nation with first-world infrastructure and a defense system that was still being built from scratch. The new South African Police Service, or SAPS, replaced its predecessor in April of 1995. But this new force was fundamentally compromised from day one. Lacking the institutional cohesion of the past, SAPS was quickly overwhelmed. By the late 90s, the country had become a playground for international narco-traffickers and racketeers who realized the new police were either too incompetent to catch them or too underpaid to resist a bribe. The state was failing to protect itself, and it became clear that the blunt instrument of regular policing wasn't enough to stop the rot. The answer came from President Thabo Mbeki. On September 1st, 1999, in the township of Guguletu, he announced the creation of a new, elite unit designed to bypass the rot in the police entirely, the Directorate of Special Operations. But the public would soon know them by a much more predatory name, the Scorpions. The Scorpions' operational DNA was built in a specific policy logic. To beat sophisticated syndicates, you had to stop the silo effect where detectives hand a folder to a prosecutor and hope for the best. The mechanism was the Troika principle, a multidisciplinary formula that fused investigators, forensic analysts, and prosecutors into a single high-velocity strike team. In a traditional system, investigators work separately from the legal team. The Scorpions, however, put them in the same room from day one. Every major case was handled by a three-pronged team: a detective to find the evidence, a forensic analyst to trace the money, and a prosecutor to ensure the docket was bulletproof before it ever reached a judge. They were elite, university-educated, and many were sent to the FBI's academy at Quantico to master modern racketeering investigations. By 2003, the Scorpions were maintaining a conviction rate of over 90%. They proved the concept with the Hout Bay fishing case, where a joint task team dismantled a massive international poaching ring, leading to guilty pleas and millions in asset forfeitures. They were making significant arrests, and they were also hitting the big money players where it hurt, and doing so in the most ruthlessly efficient manner possible. However, this success was built on a rather precarious structural choice. By placing the Scorpions inside the National Prosecuting Authority or NPA rather than the South African Police Service or SAPS, the state created an elite force that operated outside of the traditional chain of command. To the regular police, the Scorpions were the Hollywood boys, overpaid and arrogant. The Scorpions may have been winning the war on crime, but they were slowly beginning to lose the turf war. And as their investigations moved from the fishing docks to the corridors of the new South African power structures, that friction was about to become a political explosion. In the world of high-stakes anti-corruption, there's a singular, lethal paradox. If you're too incompetent, you're a waste of taxpayer money. If you're too effective, you're a threat to the regime. By 2004, the Scorpions had become the most effective investigative tool in South African history, and that was precisely why they had to die. They made the fatal miscalculation of believing the rule of law applied even to those with the right struggle credentials. They flew too close to the sun, and the sun in this story was the multi-billion rand 1999 arms deal, a 43.8 billion rand procurement package that would become the original sin of post-apartheid corruption. The turning point came in April 2001, when the Scorpions confirmed they were investigating allegations of massive kickbacks and fraud within the arms deal. By July of that year, the investigation had a name that would haunt South African politics for the next 2 decades: Deputy President Jacob Zuma. This was the moment the Scorpions' existence became entangled with that of the national South African politics. The Scorpions were doing exactly what they were built for, targeting priority crimes and market leaders in crime who believed they could corrupt with impunity. But in the ANC's ecosystem of political tribalism, an attack on a senior leader is seen as a factional hit. In August 2003, Mbulelani Nkuka, the National Director for Public Prosecutions under which the Scorpions worked, walked to a podium and committed one of the most catastrophic tactical blunders in South African legal history. He announced that while the Scorpions had established a prima facie case of corruption against Jacob Zuma, they were choosing not to prosecute because the case wasn't yet winnable in court. This is a perfectly reasonable choice from a lawyer's point of view, but to a politician, it was incredibly damaging. By branding Zuma as probably guilty without giving him a day in court to defend himself, Nkuka handed his enemy the ultimate weapon: the role of the martyr. The Zuma faction primarily used ad hominem tactics, attacking the man leading the charge. A blizzard of leaks suddenly alleged that Nkuka himself was an apartheid-era spy, the ultimate mark of a traitor in the new democracy. It was a brilliant diversion that forced the state to stall its investigations and launch the Heifer Commission just to see if its top prosecutor was a double agent. While the commission eventually cleared Nkuka of all charges, the damage to the Scorpions was permanent. Their flashy raids and FBI-style swagger, once their greatest assets, were now weaponized against them as proof of an arrogant, captured elite. The narrative had successfully shifted from Zuma's corruption to the Scorpions' legitimacy. In the brutal world of ANC factionalism, the unit had become a political liability that the rising Zuma faction was determined to liquidate. Simultaneously, a more traditional turf war was being waged. The SAPS, led by National Commissioner Jackie Celebi, resented the Scorpions' elite status and their budget. Celebi, who would later be convicted of corruption himself for his ties to drug smuggler Glenn Agliotti, was a vocal critic of the unit's independence. To the SAPS leadership and the ANC elite, the Scorpions were an unconstitutional anomaly because the constitution called for a single police service. The death warrant for the Scorpions was signed in December 2007 at the ANC's 52nd National Conference in Polokwane. Jacob Zuma ousted Thabo Mbeki, and with that victory, the tribalism that was becoming deeply entrenched in South African politics demanded the heads of those who had dared to investigate the new king. The conference resolved that the Scorpions be dissolved as a matter of urgency, under the guise of creating a single police service. This was the moment the high-minded theory of institutional independence ran headfirst into the brick wall of political reality in the ANC's South Africa. The party chose to prioritize the protection of its leadership over the efficacy of its anti-organized crime architecture. The most damning piece of evidence that this was politically motivated lies in the Kampepe Commission. President Mbeki had appointed Judge Sisi Kampepe in 2005 to look into the unit's future. Her report found the DSO's location within the NPA was constitutional and jurisprudentially sound, and argued that the unit should remain exactly where it was. The state commissioned the inquiry proved the unit's value, and the state, now under the sway of the Zuma faction, simply ignored it. In a move of staggering cynicism, the Kampepe report was kept secret until 2008, by which time the legislation to kill the Scorpions was already being rammed through Parliament. The legal dismantling was executed through the National Prosecuting Authority Amendment Act of 2008 and the SAPS Amendment Act of 2008. On January 30th, 2009, the Scorpions officially ceased to exist. They were replaced by the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, known as the Hawks. Unlike the Scorpions, however, the Hawks were located inside the SAPS. By moving the investigators back into the police structure, the ANC stripped away the Troika principle's independence. No longer would prosecutors and investigators work as a unified elite force under the MPA, and instead, investigators were now subject to the chain of command of the police. A structure the Scorpions had been specifically designed to bypass because of the police's own struggles with legitimacy and corruption. The ANC's decision to liquidate the Scorpions was a calculated act of institutional sabotage designed to protect a corrupt political elite. They killed the unit specifically because it was succeeding, maintaining a 90% conviction rate that proved the law could actually reach the highest officers in the land. It was a clear, lethal signal to every official in South Africa that if you came for the powerful, you'll be destroyed. This demolition kicked the door to state capture wide open. By hiding behind the legal excuse of creating a single police service, the party leadership dissolved the one agency with the independence to stop them. The era of Zuma corruption was the inevitable result of breaking the state's most effective defense. When the Scorpions were replaced by the structurally shackled Hawks in 2009, the South African state effectively lost its conscience. When the Scorpions were liquidated in 2009, it marked the systematic decimation of South Africa's investigative brain trust. The human consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The elite investigators, the forensic analysts who had been trained at Quantico, were suddenly given a choice: join the SAPS-controlled Hawks or leave. For the best of them, the choice was no choice at all. They refused to be subsumed into a police service they knew was riddled with political appointees and career detectives who had spent years resenting the Scorpions' success. There was a mass exodus to the private sector, and the Scorpions' DNA ended up in corporate risk departments and private security firms, protecting the assets of the wealthy while the state's own defenses were left hollowed out. The removal of the Scorpions was the green light for the era of state capture. Without a prosecution-led unit capable of operating outside the ANC's patronage network, the market leaders in crime moved from the streets into the boardrooms of state-owned enterprises. The Hawks, despite the bravery of a few individual officers, lacked the institutional independence to stop it. As the Constitutional Court would later rule in 2011, the Hawks were not adequately independent. The result was a decade of impunity. Because the Scorpions were dead, the cost of corruption dropped to zero. High-level investigations into the arms deal, the Gupta family, and the systematic looting of Eskom and Transnet were either strangled in the crib or buried in the dysfunctional handoff between underqualified detectives and overworked prosecutors that were operating in a fragmented system that the corrupt could navigate with ease. The most visceral consequence was the loss of public faith. South Africans watched as the ultimate crime fighters were traded for a single police service that seemed more interested in protecting the powerful than policing them. Today, the ghost of the Scorpions haunts every political rally in South Africa. After a decade of state capture that nearly bankrupted the country, the pendulum has swung back toward the Scorpions' original logic. In 2019, the state established the Investigating Directorate, and by 2024, Parliament enacted the NPA Amendment Act, creating the Investigating Directorate Against Corruption, or IDAC. IDAC is, for all intents and purposes, Scorpions 2.0. It's a permanent, prosecution-led unit with criminal investigative powers housed inside the NPA. The state has finally admitted what it denied in 2008. To fight systemic corruption, you need an elite, multidisciplinary unit that's insulated from the ordinary police chain of command. But the question remains, is this a genuine return to form, or just a cosmetic fix? Opposition parties still campaign on the promise of a real Scorpions unit, one with full constitutional protection that can't be dissolved by a simple majority vote in Parliament. They know that as long as IDAC exists at the pleasure of the current political leadership, it remains vulnerable to the same Polokwane-style execution that killed its predecessor. The Scorpions story has become a cautionary tale for the world. An anti-corruption unit is only as strong as the political will to let it investigate its own creators. In South Africa, the demand for a return of the Scorpions is less about a specific name and more about a yearning for the era when there was at least one branch of the law that had claws. Whether IDAC can grow those claws without being clipped by the next factional shift in the ANC is the central drama of South Africa's future. The death of the Scorpions functioned as a calculated survival strategy for a political elite that had run out of places to hide. By dismantling the only unit capable of reaching them, the leadership traded the security of the nation for their own personal impunity. They broke the unbreakable machine because it was doing exactly what it was built to do, enforcing the law without fear or favor. Today, as the state tries to rebuild that same model under a different name, the fundamental tension remains. You can change the name on the door from Scorpions to IDAC, but you can't change the political reality. An anti-corruption unit is only as strong as the government's willingness to be investigated. We're left with the ghost of the Troika principle, operating in a country still reeling from the decade of state capture that followed the Scorpions' liquidation. But what do you think? Was the disbanding of the Scorpions the single biggest mistake in the history of the new South Africa? Or was their Hollywood style always going to end in this kind of political explosion? Can any unit truly be independent when the people it investigates hold the power to dissolve it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Does IDAC have the teeth to finish what the Scorpions started, or is the cycle just destined to repeat? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the legacy of South Africa's elite guard dog and the Zuma-era corruption that killed it, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.